All right. We are back. Thankfully, the Raptors of Toronto have rallied, taking games 3 and 4 at home, extending the series. We get not just today, but at least one more, hopefully, quite possibly, 2 additional games to discuss here. I will stick with my original Bucks in 7 prediction at this point, but it's certainly become interesting with a couple really strong showings out of the Toronto squad over these last couple games. We'll continue to talk about some junk as people file into the room. There's no Warriors game to discuss here, so I guess we'll talk about some other things. The NBA, the All NBA teams came out as always. Fun for 2 reasons: discussing who got snubbed for team to team or in their entirety, a la Brad Beal, etc. Or also discussing about the hilarious votes cast by members of the media. This year highlighted for me by the person who gave Dwayne Wade a second team vote, not just third, second, and the 2 probable homers who gave Domantas Sabonis and Marvin Bagley III a vote for all NBA teams. Both fine players, but likely not in the top 6 forwards in the game. Let's see. Giannis's distinction as being first team again gives him, along with his previous accolades, the ability to sign the richest deal, 5-year extension in the history of the NBA. That would be a 5-year extension worth just a hair over $250 million, which would pay him, I think, $56 million in the final year, if I recall the breakdown correctly, 42 to 56. Over those 5 years. That got me thinking about the salary cap for a little bit. The WNBA tips off tomorrow. Best of luck to the women in that league. I won't be providing any coverage this year for the WNBA, but I really enjoyed it the 1 year that I did. But whenever it comes down to salaries, I always end up being... I will discuss Bledsoe. I will discuss all those things. I'm going to apparently discuss the NBA for about a minute, the WNBA rather, and then we'll get into tonight's thing proper. But usually it takes 5 minutes to file in, so we'll do that for a minute first. I always get conflicted talking about the WNBA. I am full social justice warrior. The allowance of weapons has me concerned, but I've marched frequently. I've protested frequently. The Ku Klux Klan is having a gathering just down the street this weekend, this Saturday. And I am torn between anti-protesting or holding up a sign, because I'm a much bigger fan of changing minds than demonizing those who are raised poorly. So even those I violently disagree with, I try not to be violent towards. I really, just like to talk to them. Or I'm also thinking about pulling out Pokemon Go and taking some really nice pictures of them alongside some Pokemon. So I'm probably going to do one of those things, but... I like that there is a WNBA. I think the Me Too movement was overall great for this nation and the country. I have a daughter who I want to have every opportunity in the world, but I'm also a big market solution kind of guy. And every year the conversation comes up at some point where women have to pay overseas to make even a fraction of the money men make, and how incredibly underpaid they are relative to the men. And I'm sympathetic to a degree, although people making, $100,000 a year to play basketball, I have more sympathy for, people digging in mines for $1.75 a day. But I certainly think the concern is real, but it's funny because people are like, oh my God, they're so underpaid, the men are so overpaid. Not by any understanding of what overpaid and underpaid mean in a modern economic sense. Men are actually probably slightly underpaid, certainly the top of the bench due to the salary cap. LeBron moving to the Lakers is worth so much money to them. I don't know what the number is, but it's more than his goddamn salary. Whereas the women, the WNBA loses money every year, has lost money every year of its existence, and women's sports just aren't nearly as popular as men's sports, and not as many people go to the live games. It's hard to get as wonderful of a TV deal. So it's tough because the women are paid much less than the men, and I think by any normal economic sense, the women are actually overpaid because they're subsidized basically, and the men are a little bit underpaid. So that's always a tough conversation for me. There's more to it than that. The men get 50% of the revenue, I think, maybe 49, 51, wherever the hell the deal stands now. Whereas the women get something closer to 20, and obviously there's a much smaller cap of revenue. So it's a more involved conversation than that. But always torn between my social liberalism and, I don't know, fiscal practicality. All that blather aside, I really did enjoy the games. There's a game nearby. You should go. You'll enjoy it. You're not going to see athletic feats of massive impressiveness, at least as far as their measurement. But I enjoyed every game I watched, and I enjoyed covering it. So it's interesting talking about athletic feats and talking about Giannis and his eligibility contract, because I get into this on Twitter all the time. He's such a polarizing player where a lot of people like to dislike him, and it's for a number of reasons. But I think the largest one is that when you're talking about world-class NBA players, he, like all the other guys who were named, the 15 men named on those teams today, are excellent at many, many things. He's arguably best in the world at some of them, but he is pretty unique in the fact that he's bad at what come down to being one of the most basic things people think about when they look at basketball, which is shooting the basketball. It is an understandable, logical disconnect for people to be like, Giannis is the MVP. In theory, saying Giannis is the best basketball player in the world, giving him the most valuable player in the best league in the world. I don't think that's an unreasonable extrapolation of the award. And he airballed a free throw each of the last 2 games. He can't shoot a basketball. And I listened to a radio host the other day, who amazing has a job, but of the remarkably stupid things he said, among them was Giannis is not a superstar, and his rationale was, I don't want him taking an 18-footer as the horn sounds for my team. And while that's incredibly, incredibly stupid, I get it. That is our zeitgeist, our collective view of an NBA superstar is like, this guy is, Kobe, Jordan. This guy's just going to drill it with no time on the clock. And, that's generally wrong. But it feels weird. We like our favorite players, our best players, to look great, and dude has trouble making a bucket. That's interesting. He just contributes in so many ways in that he's the top 3 players in the game on the defensive side of the court, and in his impact, one of the most impactful players on the offensive side of the court as well, because he demands so much attention and can just do other things. But I was thinking about that as well, because we talked about Giannis and physicality and stuff. I think we're ready. We got 35 minutes until lock, so let's get into this game proper. No expected lineup changes, or at least I haven't seen them yet, although there are 2 that would not surprise me. Both would come on the Milwaukee squad. I would not be shocked to see Malcolm Brogdon start over Nikola Mirotic, who has not been great and has always been a bit of a defensive liability in this series, especially for sorry, people are responding to the Pokemon Ku Klux Klan thing and interesting things, but I've burnt all my talking about my bullshit time, so maybe post-lock. But led to some Raptors getting out fast starts. This Bucks team has fallen behind in the first quarter often. I think I read 8 out of the last 10 games. So getting Brogdon in there, who, excepting the last game, has been really, really good. He was in the first 3 best possible lineups you could have built, games 1, 2, and 3. Price on FanDuel is still a little prohibitive. DK, I still like him quite a bit in tournaments. Ceiling capped a touch, but looks really good, and generally just fits a little better than Mirotic. It's not like what Mirotic... Brogdon can just do more, and... Mirotic can make some threes for you. Brogdon is maybe the best 3-point shooter on this team, maybe the best 3-point shooter in this series. He's really, really, really quite good. Again, he joined the 40, 50, 90 club this year, which is, 9 players in it ever of people who shot 40% from 3, 50% from the field, and 90% from the line. It's literally basically 8 Hall of Famers in him. I would not be shocked to see Brogdon start for Mirotic, though I don't necessarily expect that. You think healthy Kawhi is a better three-point shooter? I'd have to look into the percentages. I think statistically it's a little bit worse, but again, Kawhi is playing more first units recently and generates more defensive attention. It's difficult to compare them in a vacuum. And then there's that whole ingrained assignment of Kawhi is a little better of getting his shot, and does that make him a better shooter? Like you can get guys out there who uncontested can shoot 90% from three. Is that guy a better shooter than Kawhi Leonard, who can shoot 40% from three and shake 98% of the players in the league? There's a lot of math there. But I also would not be shocked to see George Hill start for Eric Bledsoe. I already love him basically on DraftKings. So the whole Bledsoe Hill conversation to me comes down to the fact. Kawhi 37% on 5 attempts, Brogdon 42.6 on 3.8 attempts this year, or that might be career. But either way, Brog can't shake as many guys, so it's there's a lot going on there. But where was I? So Bledsoe and Hill. Bledsoe's been shit, and I have stuck with the concept of playing him in GPPs and seeing him over the last slate. I think he was 17% owned in Game 4. I think he was 20% owned in Game 3, and my opinion in each of those games was I still really like him in tournaments. I would have more than that. I would have 25%. I would have 30% because the opportunity is there. He can accrue a lot of defensive stats, doesn't get enough credit. As a defender, he's been really good this year. There are also, the sub issues, locker room issues behind it. They just signed him to a multi-year extension, 3 years, I think, at a very healthy rate. So you're a little less inclined to pull that guy out of the starting lineup or out of minutes. But this last game, the minutes disappeared, and at that point, not disappeared. I'll be more descriptive in a minute. But at that point, I'm much more concerned because now I need him to be so good that they can't take him off the court. Because otherwise, last game he got 20 minutes, and he was only going to get 20 minutes. I don't think he was going to close that game. We don't know because the scrubs came in. He didn't close that game, but none of the starters closed that game. But he started, but played in both the first and second halves, 3 stints each of sort of a mini Embiid rotation where he played 3.5 minutes on average in each of those stints, and played just a bit over 20 minutes. So I am projected for 21 minutes tonight. I can't do that. At that point, I'm not saying 0. It's a one-game slate. Very few guys would be 0 if you're MMEing 10 or more lineups. I would get into having some Bledsoe, but about 10% is as high as I would want to go. I would have wanted to have been over the field, and I would have lost all of those lineups because of this for a lot of this series. But the price hasn't descended so much that you're looking at, in 20 minutes, even if he just has, a decent game and scores 1.2 fantasy points per minute, which would be vastly better than we've seen out of him in a while. He gives me 24, I'm not dead. That's still probably not good enough. So for me, I'm stepping off the Bledsoe train at this station. He still deserves GPP consideration in the same category as Mirotic or Brook Lopez or other guys who certainly can have a big game. And there's obviously a world where he starts and hits 3 3-pointers in the first 6 minutes and they keep him in there and he picks up some steals and some blocks and he breaks the slate. So I wouldn't say 0, but this is the first day in where I'm truly trepidatious about running out Eric Bledsoe in any significant amount of exposure. For that same reason, FanDuel, okay, the ceiling's a little bit capped. DK, George Hill is just too cheap. George Hill and Norman Powell, by all conventional mathematical understanding on DK, are the best 2 value plays to me. Pretty close. You can go cheaper to Norm Powell. You can go a little more expensive to Serge Ibaka. But based on the amount I'm hearing his name, I think Ibaka is going to be much more significantly owned than I'd like him to be if I was investing there. And the price is obviously low enough at $5,200, I think is the DK price, that he can obviously get there. And they'd had some rebounding issues, which obviously Ibaka helps address, but some extra time came in that last game due to the fact that Pascal Siakam was again in pretty significant foul trouble. They did stagger Bledsoe and Giannis a little bit as far as their minutes in that last game, and it didn't help. Bledsoe was terrible again. Do I think Ersan is fine value at 2K? I think he's fine value. I think that's a perfect adjective. I don't think it's thrilling. There's a real chance you get 13, 14 minutes. If they make a starting lineup change and you get Ersan starting, Ersan starting, but you get Brogdon starting, or I could see his minutes coming down to, you see him trending as low as 13, 14, 15, and he's sometimes not that productive. So I think I have him projected for 16 minutes and 15 and a half fantasy points or something for Ersan. But 2K is 2K. I'm fine if you go there instead of, say, Fred VanVleet. The real story of that last game was the Raptors bench was really good, and that led to them getting a few extra minutes, and Powell, for the second consecutive game, was really good, and Ibaka was good, and Fred VanVleet was good, and that let them be a little nicer with the starters' minutes and shave a minute off those guys, and then the blowout let them save even a couple more minutes. Is Kawhi still gimpy? He's not 100%. Nick Nurse's exact quote on the situation was, he's looked a little better today than he has recently, but that is a far cry from that dude's 100%. So Kawhi. The only player who was in all four perfect lineups over the first four games of the series was Giannis. He was the captain twice. Once Brook Lopez, game one, was the captain one time. Marc Gasol got there as the captain. But on those 2 days, you wanted Giannis in the spare part of the lineup. I have reduced his projection and Kawhi's projection from the beginning of the series. And I imagine I might end up slightly under the field on both of them at this point. But they're both very strong plays. DK, again, the existence of the really good value makes it pretty easy to play both of them. So I'm fine with one. FanDuel, they're from the beginning of the series, my projections for both of them have fallen by a couple of points, and their prices have risen. So it's not as easy to start every lineup with the two of them, which was certainly my inclination for at least game one and game two of this series. Everybody's price is up. Giannis is now guarded primarily by Kawhi, games 3 and 4. And that obviously is knocks off his projection, not by a ton, by about 5% for me. And Kawhi is no longer fully healthy, and I think it's relevant to say expending more energy on the defensive end of the court. So I have Kawhi off quite a few points from the beginning of the series. I have him at about 49.5 expected today. I have Giannis at about 55, which is a couple points off for him as well. That being said, showdown slates generally favor stars and scrubs constructions, especially when you deal with a points multiplier. It's pretty rare on DraftKings and almost unheard of on FanDuel where your top guy, captain and or MVP, is not the player who scores the most points on the day. Let's see, other things to talk about. A lot of credit was given to the change of scenery and returning back to Toronto for Toronto playing better in those last couple games. And of course, that obviously helps. Sleeping in your own bed, the home crowd, all those things certainly are relevant. But for me, it was more the switch up defensively. And it's not... we don't have time to discuss all the various factors that play into it. But the biggest one is Kawhi doesn't need as much help. He needs a little help, and people are still helping, but when Kawhi doesn't need all the help that Pascal needed, you don't get Marc Gasol doubling over as much, which means you don't get 45 or 57 fantasy points out of Brook Lopez like you did in Game 1. Because Marc Gasol's on him most of the time. More of the time, at least. And that's really what it comes into. I could talk about it more than that, but I do think that's an important change to point out, and I think that continues to lead to a slightly rosier offensive outlook by extension for the other players on the Bucks. Now, again, it depends who you are. I do think it significantly limits the possibility of another big Brolo game, for example, because now there's just less doubling out of Marc Gasol, which means it's a little less likely Brolo gets open to takes 13 three-pointers and make 7 of them, and so on and so forth. He still can obviously make 4 or 5 and pick up enough defensive stats that he can easily beat out his price. I'm fine with you playing Brook Lopez. But the game 1 result didn't shock me, and before game 1 I said, like, one of these other guys can pop off due to the doubling, and that's what we got. Before game 4 was the first time I said, in the limited Periscope I did, that some of you may have seen, but I got back from some commitments only about 20 minutes before lock and talk for a little bit, that it was the first day I probably would want to have more than the field of Chris Middleton. And he obviously had a very strong game. It's important to look at the big Middleton game and the big George Hill game and understand that there was some understandable small sample size, but some efficiency you can't expect. You're not going to get, I think it was 7 of 9 from the field out of George Hill and 11 for 15 from the field out of Chris Middleton, and so on and so forth. So we saw kind of their respective ceilings. I like George Hill a lot on DK. On FanDuel, man, getting that ceiling is tough for him. Like, he just is very deferential as a point guard. He's a good. I'm a huge George Hill stan. I have a George Hill Cavs jersey, actually. And talked about him all 3 rounds of these playoffs and saying he should get more time, and the fact that Eric Bledsoe can't hit the broadside of a goddamn barn is certainly helping him get some more time, but he's finally getting, more of the nod over I don't know, I've forgotten his name. Pat Connaughton. That took well longer than it should have. Which I've been calling for a while, and I'm just a fan there. Same thing with Malcolm Brogdon. Should get more time than Mirotic. Mirotic is going to rebound a little better. That's about it. Other than that, he's generally going to be worse in every way than Brogdon. Brogdon can create his own shot better. Mirotic's a great shooter. Brogdon's a better one. Defensively is better in this particular matchup, I think. Especially when you're, tasked with Danny Green. He's going to be better at help defense. Like, it just works out better. So, yeah. Let's see, other things. Let me look at my notes. I'm just sort of top of my heading this, but I've certainly hit all the important things. Interesting statistical wrinkle is that the Raptors have actually led this series for more than 60% of it. They were leading more than the Bucks through 2 games. The Trailblazers ended up leading that series more than the Warriors, which is insane. They got swept and were ahead more than they were behind. And if the Raptors do lose this series in 6 or 7 games, I'd be curious how often it would be that both conference finals were won by teams that trailed the majority of the time. So let's talk about some other things on specific players. Danny Green's still just not priced well enough for me to be super interested. I guess more so on FanDuel, where the value is a little less specious. Like, I like several of the value plays on DraftKings. I like playing George Hill. I like playing Norman Powell. I like playing Fred VanVleet. There's just enough ceiling there. He's had, 1 or 2 good games out of his last 14. He's been dreadful. But he's also dreadfully cheap. And obviously the minutes can tick up a little bit. By extension, Kyle Lowry's still dealing with the issue on his right hand. Didn't seem to affect him all in that last game, though wasn't as good in the second half after re-aggravating that injury and popping it out again as he had been in the first half. Another 48 hours off might be fine, might not be fine, but it's just another way Fred VanVleet can get there. I don't mind Serge Ibaka. I don't like Serge Ibaka as much. I have Serge Ibaka for 22 minutes. There are a number of ways he can exceed that. Marc Gasol, foul trouble or injury. Pascal Siakam, foul trouble or injury. Just plays well and gets more time. Really getting waxed on the boards. You'll see Nurse put him out there next to Gasol a little bit more. But I think, 60-40 he doesn't get to 24 minutes. I think that's a little bit unlikely. Who do you have projected higher, Lowry or Middleton? Yeah, I have Lowry, Siakam, and Middleton all within, I think, about 1.5 points in the mid-30s. And so it really ends up being, by any points per dollar question, a little bit site dependent. On FanDuel, it's $13,000 for Siakam, which is fine, and he's absolutely fine to play in tournaments, and we saw the upside the one game where he got 50 fantasy points in 50 minutes or whatever in a couple overtimes, and he's really struggled with foul trouble. Pascal Siakam has had 4, 5, and 6, has had 15 fouls over the last 3 games. That has significantly limited his playing time. I still have him for about 33 if he's healthy. There's a chance it's 1 or 2 less than that. Chances there's 1 or 2 more. But I'm fine with Siakam in tournaments. But from a raw points per dollar perspective, I again have him almost on top of Lowry and Middleton, who on FanDuel are 12 for Middleton and 11 for Lowry, I think. Those both feel better to me from just a raw points perspective. And again, every dollar kind of matters on FanDuel. The value is pretty shitty. Norm Powell at 6,500 is really the only guy under 8,000 you want to take any shot at, unless you think there's a giant blowout, and anything you gain by running Bonzi out there and Tim Frazier because you think it's a giant blowout, you're probably seeding some of, because the only reason you're playing those guys at 6K was so you could stack the top of your lineup with Giannis and Kawhi, who, by extension, aren't playing that many minutes because it's a massive blowout. So it's the value on FanDuel is a little specious. I think it's 6,500 for VanVleet. Then it's really up to 8,000 for anyone that you particularly like. Awesemo has Hill at 3% on FanDuel. That can't be right. No, that will not be right. I would have him in the low 20s to high teens. Let's look at some previous ownership from the last slate the day before yesterday. And let's talk. I downloaded the DK one before. So the DraftKings ownership in the 500K or whatever was last time main slate was 93% Giannis, which, again, they keep having very reasonable value, and he's been in every best possible lineup, and, 93% is around where I think you should be, maybe 90. 85 would be too low. The odds on him not being in the top lineup at all are pretty small. Kawhi was at 88. Now, that's going to come down a little bit, I think. Again, his price rose, I think, $200 on DK. He had his worst game of the series, which was 41 fantasy points, I think it was, in limited time due to the fact that there was a blowout there. And again, I haven't projected for just a hair under 50 tonight. Certainly makes some sense, but again, with his price so close to Giannis, by any raw points projection, I'm going to play Giannis over Kawhi at their prices there. Third was Norman Powell at 56%. Fourth, and that's going to stay the same or increase a little bit, probably increase. Fourth was Marc Gasol at 47%. He got there. Powell gave you 30. Gasol gave you 40. Both a little bit more than that in the last slate. They're both going to bump up a little more. Pascal was at 46. And has now had really one good game and 3 pretty shit games this series with like 30, 20, and 25 in the other 3 games. So that number's going to come down. The price has come down a little bit. I like Siakam, so that number will come down. Mirotic was 35. That number is certainly going to come down. Middleton was 31. That number is certainly going to come up. Middleton is too cheap on both sides for my projection. Not massively too cheap, and he is going to be popular, so I wouldn't be in a tizzy if I didn't have Mirotic in my lineup. Middleton in my lineup, but I like him quite a bit. George Hill was 31%. That number is going to come up. Brook Lopez was 29. That'll probably drop a little. Kyle Lowry was only 29. And when we read that out, I was like, yeah, that's too little. He put up 41. Ersan was obviously back to earth, having had one big game in the series. He was 21. Ibaka was 20%, and that was a very happy 20% when he dropped his 40 burger. Malcolm Brogdon was 20% and had a shit game. And he's not getting gotten to a lot. Now, there isn't a brilliant upside there, but there's 35, there's 40 that you can get out of him. So I'd be over, again, expected high teens, low 20s Brogdon ownership. In that last game, he shot uncharacteristically badly for him. Again, he's a great shooter. I think he was 2 for 11 in that contest. So, and Bledsoe was 18% last time, and I imagine that will fall down to 10, 11, 12 at this point. But again, for me, the minutes being as badly as they were, he was going to play 20, maybe he was going to get 22, 23 minutes if he closed that game. Now I'm concerned. Now it's, okay, we lost a game, and we lost 2 games. You got to put your best team out there. I don't think he's necessarily in it. So, let's check on a couple things. Can you play Brogdon and Hill in the same lineup on DraftKings? Sure. I would try not to play Hill and Bledsoe. Still not impossible on a 1-game slate, but I try not to do that, and they do play next to each other quite a bit. Is it worth going to Danny Green on DK for a GPP? What are the chances he outscores Powell? Yes, I think it's worth going to it because he's going to be 1/7 owned. He was in single digits. I didn't get to him because he was in single digits on the last slate. He was 8.5% in the last slate, and then had his worst game of the series where he had 10 fantasy points. Now he hasn't gotten to 20 fantasy points yet, but certainly 25 is possible out of him. What are the odds he outscores Powell? At least 1 in 4. That's probably a low estimate, but I'll say it's 1 in 4. So 1 in 4 times your guy at 7 or 8%, I think, for Danny Green tonight, is going to outscore Norman Powell at a similar price, who's going to be 50% owned. So yeah, I'm fine with going with some Danny Green there. I hate it when something happens. Can someone give me a quick idea of who Eddie likes or dislikes? The video won't load. That sucks because I really try not to reduce things to like and dislikes. I feel bad for him. Would you run VanVleet and Hill in the same line on DraftKings? Why not? Very little to do with each other. So yeah, I'm totally fine with them. Other things. Let me see what I'm thinking. So we talked about that. We've talked about that. Someone said thoughts on Gasol. I like Marc Gasol. I have him projected for about 31 fantasy points. Getting 40 plus a couple games in a row was more than I expect out of him in general, though obviously it's in the realm of possibilities, and he's still just well too cheap, especially on DraftKings. So I'm a pretty big fan of having some Marc Gasol. He's going to be 50% owned, but certainly no significant objection there. I would try not to play him with Gasol, with Ibaka, but they both got their last game. But in one lineup, they're generally not going to correlate that great, because when you play Ibaka, you're kind of hoping something goes wrong with Marc Gasol. It's one of the reasons to play him. You get a lot of leverage on the field. Oh, Marc Gasol is going to be 55% owned. If he fails, then I have Ibaka, so on and so forth. So I would rather play one. If you're playing 10, 50, 100 lineups, and you have some that have both of them, that's fine. You don't need to run screaming from it. So yeah, if you have further questions, go ahead. If you are watching, if you're an Awesemo.com member, go ahead and hit me up in the premium Slack chat. Make sure to tag my name. If not, hit me on the Twitter sphere. Let's look at some of these other comments. Would you run VanVleet and Hill? We did that. Lopez or Bledsoe on DK? I would run Lopez at this point. I have Lopez playing 10 more minutes than Eric Bledsoe. Contributes in a couple more ways. Like, I liked Bledsoe legitimately last night. I won't walk away from it. Guy had been playing his 29 minutes every game. Price wasn't unreasonable playing 29 minutes, and he can, instead of shooting 3 for 13, shoot 7 for 13 and get 2 steals and a block, and all of a sudden he cracked the slate open at 17, 18% owned. And again, I thought the lineup stick was going to happen, but I can't safely project him for more than 22 minutes here. And I just can't go at that point. You slid into my DMs. What did I say about Lowry? I missed it. I like Lowry fine. I'm largely ambivalent on Lowry. Coming off a big game, the ownership will be up a little bit. He's obviously a little injured, played worse in the second half than the first half last game. Not priced unreasonable. He is priced very well on FanDuel. 11,000 on FanDuel for him is great. I see having a bit of him because I think I'd have more Giannis than Kawhi at those FanDuel prices, and when you're, fading Kawhi, you need to pick up at least a Lowry or a Siakam in that spot, so for that reason I think I'd have a fair bit, but I'm pretty ambivalent on Lowry. Again, for everyone there's an ownership number that is right versus what they should score X number of times and everybody's curve of, projected outcomes. And, for Danny Green, it is higher than the 8% he's going to be owned. For Kyle Lowry, it is around the 45% he's going to be owned. Middleton over Gasol on FanDuel, they're both 12K. That's going to be interesting. I probably would slightly rather play Middleton, but it's very close for me. I haven't projected for about 3 more fantasy points, and I expect the ownership to be fairly similar. So I think I would slightly prefer Middleton, but not a strong take between those two guys. Let's head over to the Twitter. What do you think the over-under on the game is tonight for a bet? 215.5? Oh, that's close. I don't know. I'm torn a couple ways with that question. So it's come down a couple points from when it was released. And again, we've hit a lot of unders in these series. I want to say I like the under there again with a less efficient Kawhi. But we're back in Milwaukee. Milwaukee wants to run, and Toronto wants to slow it down. Toronto's much better in the half-court defense than the transition defense. Milwaukee's done a great job scoring in the first 6 seconds of the clock. Um, Toronto has done a shit job scoring at the beginning of the clock, whereas Milwaukee really bogs down, not to be confused with Brogdon, as the clock goes on, whereas Toronto gets more efficient in the half-court. So we're back in Milwaukee, where they're going to, have some more control over the environment, I'd like to say. So that affects my... it's pretty nuanced. If you're telling me it's 215.5 and put a gun to my head, I would take the under, but I don't think the line is massively off, and I don't have a ton of confidence in it. Ooh, a private message. FanDuel, Lowry and Brogdon, or Gasol and Lopez. I will probably go with Gasol and Lopez there. That's very close. Slightly like the more unique lineup, which I think it is. Slightly like, I think, a slightly higher upside. But again, I would have those two pairings pretty close, my friend. What about the -7 line on it? Yeah, it feels like a bit much, but you have Gimpy Kawhi, you have the home team winning every game this series, you have the Bucks not having lost 3 straight games this year. Yeah, I don't have a strong take. Brogdon starting over Miro. Well, there that is. Okay, so let me have a drink of my kidney savior here. Power up. Made with the real blood of virgins. Let me get into projecting a new rotation then, because it isn't quite a direct substitution. Okay, so I'll give you some takes here, though there will not be any world-changing events. It does make me lower from a projection standpoint on Mirotic, and we're 6 minutes before lock, so I don't think there's a ton of changes there. It's a minor knock to Ersan Ilyasova. It's a minor knock to Mirotic. It is probably about an equivalent move for Brogdon. It's a minor knock for Danny Green. It does not shake anything up incredibly. It's a minor boost for George Hill. I think I would raise his minutes projection by 1 in this case, just because of a sort of a guards off the bench type situation. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of news. I'm a huge fan of news 6 minutes before lock. There's not a ton of hay to be made there. It does raise Brogdon's ceiling. We saw in the double overtime game that he's physically capable of playing 38, 39 minutes. And this is pretty damn close to a must-win game. It obviously is not a must-win game. It's not an elimination game, but you really don't want to go down and go back to Toronto. So maybe those minutes push up a little bit. So because there's a much better chance when he's starting now that you get 35 minutes out of Brogdon, it wouldn't change his projection a lot for me, because that possibility already, I had him projected for, I think, 28. There was a possibility he played 34 off the bench and closed the game, whatever, anyway, so it doesn't radically change how I had him projected, but I liked him in tournaments at the start of the day, and it's a little more secure now, and the upside's probably raised a little bit, so I'm fine with Broggy Pants in your world. And again, I think he was in the best possible lineup the first 3 days of this series. He was in the first one at 6,000. He was in the second one at 7,000. I'm sorry he did not make it either game in Toronto. I am mistaken. But he made it both games in Milwaukee, where are they playing tonight? Half-Life 3 confirmed. Is Kawhi fadeable on FanDuel? Yes. Who else can you see in the star position? I made one lineup. It has Chris Middleton in it. I can see playing Siakam, Middleton, Lowry, would be the 3 guys I would want to put there. My first choice, and again, I haven't touched this lineup or done much with it in a few hours, would probably be to play Siakam or Lowry there, but it's certainly not a requirement. But generally, if you're going to put Giannis in there as your MVP, it makes sense. You'll try to put a Raptor in that second spot, and if you're fading Kawhi, you're obviously hoping for some sort of better than average game out of Siakam or Lowry. Someone's got to pick up the production you're presuming he is not going to get. So I imagine an order of preference in that second spot for me would be probably in order: Siakam, then Lowry, then Middleton, then Gasol. I think would be my favorite guys to drop in there. Alright, last check for questions, and then we'll bang out into some news. Ursan or Green on DK? I'll go with Green now. Both of them got a kick with Broggy starting there a little bit. Is Kawhi fadeable on FanDuel? Yes, we did that. Alright, lineups in. All questions and tweets answered. I'm going to look for any sort of extra news or specific commentary on the lineup or anything I might have missed before, but not, unfortunately, world-shaking news. And I like me some world-shaking news, but that, my friend, is not it. And we will do some ownership in just a couple of seconds, and then I shall release you all from my clutches for the duration of the evening. No, seems like we have everything. Yeah, no, my hair is took a shower a couple hours ago, and it's starting to become aware. One of my favorite websites that we're locked to check out is called Old School Wrestling. It's oswreview.com, and they watch old WWE pay-per-views, usually 80s and 90s, and it's these 3 Irish guys who commented, and they're funny as shit, and they have all kinds of gimmicks and little sketches, and one of them is the Kane Frizzometer, and Kane was this big, near 7 foot tall, 300-pound guy who alternatingly had long flowing red hair or a wig that had long flowing red hair, and when it was his real hair, they have the Kane Frizz meter, where as matches went on, his hair, which starts the match fairly subdued, gets a little the hell out of control. So my Frizzometer apparently is going up as the show progresses. Let's take a look at some ownership, friends. All right, $375,000, the top ticket on FanDuel. Giannis Antetokounmpo, 90%. Middleton, only 43. I'm pretty happy with that at 12,000. I do think last game, I don't have him projected for 50. I have him projected for the mid-30s. But 50 is obviously possible when he shoots 70% from the field, and 40 wouldn't surprise me at all, obviously, and 12,000 was a little too cheap for him. Lowry at 40%, that feels good. Powell at 41%, a little lower than I thought on FanDuel, where value is pretty rough, and he's, I think, the best $8,000 guy, and the only one you'd want under 8,000 would be VanVleet, as we mentioned. Brogdon, 20%. That feels pretty good. I'd be pretty excited about 20% Broggy. Fred VanVleet, 29%. Again, not terribly surprising. Kawhi Leonard, 44%. Okay. Like, he is literally less than half owned what Giannis is. And he's cheaper by $2,000. So the math would say that he has to outscore Giannis about 30% of the time for him to be the better play here. And he will outscore Giannis more than 30% of the time. So that's too low on Kawhi, 44. And if we get a Game 6 and if he fails today, yeah, we're going to want to jump on that. Again, Brogdon, 20. That feels great. Ibaka, 40. Yeah, That's my point. There's a number for everyone. The number for him should be under that. George Hill, 11. Mirotic, 15. I don't know. $9,500. I'm not sure about that. Gasol, 38. Let's look on DraftKings where I can download the Hoopachoo and save myself all this egregious legwork. What do we got? We got a 500 again. $500,000 Beast in the East, which really should be Beast of the East because it's best of the West, and that particular phrasing preposition seems more appropriate. But and I see a couple questions coming in. We will handle those before we go off the air as well. Giannis Antetokounmpo, 97.3%. So yeah, I'd have been under that. There's enough ways with Lowry and D that just other guys get there, and neither of them are good. That's 97% in the largest tournament. That is a goddamn number. I think I'd have put myself in the 80 to 85 range, but Kawhi Leonard, 73. That's about right there. That's a little more logical. Marc Gasol, I said 55. 55.24, right on the nose. George Hill, 46. That's a little cheap. He's the best value play on a one-game slate. Norman Powell, 41. Again, those were the top two guys. I apparently overestimated Serge's ownership. He's down quite a bit. Pascal Siakam, still 35.5. Kyle Lowry, 30. Brolo, 30. Eric Bledsoe, 28. We all know how this story ends. He goes off tonight and has his first good game in however the hell long, and it's okay. But yeah, he was going to play 22 minutes in that last game, and there were non-fucking around territory here, so I'd have way less. I'd have like 10%, so we'll see how it goes, but I know we're all worried about this. Broggy Pants, 27%. I'd want well more. Serge Ibaka, 22%. All the chatter today, I thought he was going to be in like the mid-30s. That's a fine number for him, and 5,200 is not much of a tad. Mirotic, 20%. I don't know. Ersan Ilyasova, 20%. I'm not sure. Fred VanVleet, some minutes are going to get, someone there is going to get a bit of a haircut, as the saying goes. Fred VanVleet, 19%. That's fine. Pat Connaughton, 8%. I don't know what you've been watching. Got blowout run last game and was effective in it, so I guess if you're expecting a blowout. And Danny Green, 7%. I like Danny Green quite a bit at 7%. Sterling Brown, 0.07, so it goes from 7% to literally 1/100th of that. Jody Meeks, 0.06. Tim Frazier, 0.03. Jeremy Lin, 0.03. Bonzi Colson, 0.03. DJ Wilson, 0.02. I think he's available. Tony Snell, 0.02. Chris Boucher, 0.02. Malcolm, 0.01. Jordan Lloyd, 0.01. Eric Moreland, 0.01. Pat McCaw, 0.00. Congratulations, you played yourself. He is actually inactive tonight. Checking a couple final questions or comments, and then shuffling off. Did I know Kane is a mayor now? Yeah, Tennessee, I want to say, is where he's the mayor of a town. But yeah, and looking at, I think, a future political career in Congress or something, sort of libertarian Republican, I think. Knox County, Tennessee. So there it is. Siakam only 18% star spot in the FanDuel 375. That seems well low. In the star spot, that doesn't seem crazy. And then people throwing some ownerships at me. Again, we read all these. They were about what we expected. Here comes the Bledsoe game. Yeah, I'm going to be really aggravated. Siakam with 2 fouls already. That happened fast. I mean, that got out of hand in a hurry. Really? That's unfortunate. Basketball, 2 fouls in 2 minutes and a turnover. So to the bench for the rest of the first quarter and in negative scoring. Okay. I don't know about that. That seems like it could be rough. There we are, my friends. So I will be back again the day after tomorrow, and hopefully 2 days after that, and then for the big $1 million contests on the 30th or the 31st, whenever the hell those finals end. So best of luck in your contest tonight, and bonne chance.